Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's IAQ Matters Online Workshop, Improving School IAQ and HVAC, ESSER Funding and Beyond. With me today, I have a special guest, Regina Martino from Trimco CPG Incorporated. How you doing, Regina?
Great. How are you doing, Troy?
I'm doing good. So the purpose of today's webinar is to kind of go over what is going on, the current state of the union with the ESSER funding and the HRIF funding, and then start to think about planning a continuity strategy as we move away from these rounds of public funding and getting back into our normal school funding streams. And so today, we're going to talk about improving IAQ and HVAC, but using these funds and other vehicles to continue to do so. And so today we're going to look at the historical perspectives, what we found coming out of COVID and how schools have been using these funds. We're going to just dive into the successive rounds of ESSER language and how it improved for IAQ and HVAC. Then we're going to take a look at kind of what we're hearing now, current perspectives as we're dealing with our customers and prospects. And then we're going to jump right into planning beyond ESSER with ongoing strategies, cooperative purchasing, compliance. And then once we establish how we can tie these two areas together, we're going to quickly move through some of the methods that you can use to improve your indoor air quality and heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment. And so let's go ahead and jump right in. I'll go ahead and kick this off because this is sort of right in the wheelhouse of what we're going to talk about specifically with managing indoor air quality and using these funds to do so. In 2021, a report was undertaken by the U.S. Green Building Council in conjunction with the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, as well as Harvard University. And this report took a look at around 4,000 schools that serve about 3 million students, and it was assessing how these schools were using these funds to do just that, to point up indoor air quality, building envelope, HVAC, particularly ventilation in these school buildings. And what it found was that non-urban schools leaned more on state and local guidance as to how to structure these plans, how to allocate the funding, while urban schools used more of the federal guidance, like the CDC, National Institute of Health, and then non-government organizations like ASHRAE to make their plans for improvements and for spending. But the overwhelming thing that it found, a couple of the key highlights here, is that most schools' HVAC systems could not meet what these organizations were recommending. And that was primarily being able to go to higher filtration, to be able to bring in more outside air and essentially remove all the air from the building and replace it with new. And it found that most of these schools couldn't meet these recommendations. Now, these characteristics, urban, non-urban, it didn't determine the amount of IAQ measures that were taken, but they were associated with specific measures, which makes sense if we're looking at the fact that a lot of these schools couldn't even meet these recommendations. But it were associated with things like assessing outdoor air delivery, increasing it through the HVAC system. But these last 3 points are the most telltale as we start to move through this presentation today. And that is just under half didn't even know that there was public funds available to make indoor air quality improvements on their campuses, in their schools. Over 25%, a quarter of them, said that they had no new plans for indoor air quality or HVAC changes. But the interesting thing here is of those who were doing things for their indoor air quality, it found that the funds actually were used for IAQ more than any operational or capital budgets. And of course, again, that's kind of what we're talking about today, Regina, is getting back to those operational and capital budgets when looking at addressing envelope issues, indoor air quality, and HVAC. So why don't you sort of take us through pretty quickly here how this thing progressed from when we were in the middle of the pandemic and we were just trying to do something to how it's been more evolved and more specific in its language.
Sure, and you're right. Early rounds of funding that came out when we were right in the middle of the pandemic addressed mostly PPE and other things about getting the schools and locations up and running again. And then later in March 2011, the ARP came out, and that gave additional funding. So the funds that we're talking about mostly here today are ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds, which have an expiration to have those funds encumbered being fall of 2023 for ESSER 2 and then ESSER 3, basically the same time, but in 2024. Also under this was some funding, the HERF funding for higher education and that emergency relief. And again, early rounds weren't prescriptive to building envelope and didn't spell out. And in many situations, when you look at the language or some of the prescriptive areas, it won't specifically call out roofing or building envelope. But then in these later rounds, the ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and HERF 3 and the like did talk about not only the areas of building envelope and indoor air quality, but also walls, windows, areas that then too the testing and diagnostics was also included. And so they maybe did more to say what wasn't included than specifically what was. But what we know is across the country, roofing restorations, indoor air quality assessments, diagnostics, deferred maintenance, things like that these funds have been used for and compliantly used for. So you're absolutely right. So many, because the earlier rounds, when they got later rounds of funding, weren't aware of what things in addition that they were able to do with these later rounds of funding. So hence why we're talking to everyone here today and trying to make others aware that there may still be unused funds out there that they didn't realize they could use for things that they don't have in their historical budget, or they didn't realize they could use for these types of solutions, which in many cases, some of the language will even come and say the general well-being or the general health and safety of the school or the campus. So dorms and other instructional areas, included in that.
I agree. I think it's also important to mention too, right, that while we're specifically sort of talking about schools today, there were other state, local institutions, right, non-for-profits that were able to access these funds. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yep. And in, moving on, if you go to the next slide, Troy, these public entities, too, like you were saying, they're looking at options and ways that they can deal with these things in a post-COVID, if we will, or a non-ESSER funding. So how do we go, and what do you hear now about what some of these organizations are looking at or looking for?
Well, exactly. It's like, COVID was just a bad dream, right? Here we sit in March of 2023. 3 years ago is when this thing came up and kind of caught us by surprise. And so you might think, well, gosh, we're 3 years out of this thing already. But these kind of things take time to plan and to execute, right? So what we're hearing, like boots on the ground, when we're talking to our customers, when we're talking to new prospects, is that a lot of these folks have already undertaken these assessments, right? And certainly WTI Pure Air Control Services provides assessments for the building, for the HVAC systems. But a lot of these schools have been working with energy contractors. They've already initiated studies on the conditions of the HVAC systems. They've looked at ventilation, or they might have looked at air purification units inside of the classrooms. And so now they have a data set collected over, let's say, the last year and a half, 18 months. And so now they're ready to take on maintenance and upgrades in many situations, right? They have that prescription written, and now they're looking to contract for those types of services. And so when we start to get in to the fact that these funds must be encumbered by this September and then in another year's time, the clock is definitely ticking, right? So they might be able to start some of these plans to go through and clean ductwork, for example, or to start to restore HVAC units, right? But they might be in the middle of these plans when the funds have been encumbered, but yet they have many more things on their punch list to knock down. And so that's why we start to look at this transition of coming into this post-ESSER world, right? So what are some vehicles that are going to meet their challenges, right? Provide best value and be able to provide vendor continuity. And of course, we're here today to talk about just that, Regina, and that is with cooperative purchasing, right? So why don't you take us through some of these public market challenges, and then work us through how cooperative purchasing is not only compliant in and of itself as a purchasing vehicle, but how it relates back to these public funds.
Absolutely. And you spoke to it very well. These public agencies, schools, universities, and even not-for-profits, and they have rules and regulations when they go out to purchase things or to buy things. And so in that world of having to go out or going through the traditional bid or, a solicitation where things are competitively bid, or RFPs, IFBs, all of that, there's challenges there in what they get and what the costs and the effective timelines are. So in that traditional bid marketplace, meeting some of these deadlines could be very challenging. And so not only that, but having underqualified or non-qualified systems or solutions, if they put out a blanket specification and then tried to get that back in. As you mentioned, now that they know some more information, or now maybe that, people have done some diagnostics and they know in general what they need, now moving forward with that. So not having local contractors or not being able to choose the best solution for them because they've put it out just in a, general or an equal to way, and they got back so much in that then they're not able to execute on the timeline or the way that they wanted. So many of this too, and budget predictability as well, putting something out there, having a budget or an amount they have to spend, and then having those bids come back in and being over or out of alignment with what they thought are challenging that public agencies and schools and universities and the like face every day. So that's one way in this post funding, but also to meet these funding deadlines, this will be crucial. So if you advance to the next slide, I'll go through. Many don't realize they use cooperative contracts in their organizations for commodities, but they may not realize that for things that have a installation or, as we say, a labor-based component of it, that these contracts can also be utilized. And we wanted to share this slide because in a visual sense, this is very helpful. I can't tell you how many entities I talk to that will say, hey, we have a threshold of this, we have to go out for bid, or we need to have a competitive solicitation. So I want to point out that these cooperative procurement entities and lead public agencies, they are satisfying that requirement. So it is the same as if you, the organization, has put a bid or an RFP out on the marketplace. So if you follow this around and that green box is showing, this is a legal pathway for you to be able to, work directly with a trusted vendor like Tremco CPG, and inclusive of all of our solutions and all the different divisions and things that we have available under one cooperative procurement vehicle. And because these public entities, schools, universities, not-for-profits, city, county government, are members of these cooperative entities, this is the same as them going out and going to bid. So it satisfies, and I can't underscore that enough, so that it's not that they're circumventing or they don't have to meet those bid or those solicitation requirements. This has done that for them, and it allows them to be able, as you spoke to, hey, this is what we need to do. How do we get exactly what we need when we need it, or faster? And then how do we know what this is going to cost us? So I like to point out this pathway, and if you go around that, seeing the compliance and the pieces that we bid these contracts, we respond to the bid or the invitation, it's competed, other people's respond, and then the contracting agency or entity, like E&I or AEPA or the lead public agencies or Omnia, they will then award that contract that their membership can then utilize at any point in time. And we'll get into some more specifics when we talk about some of the advantages of that in the line item contracting. So if you move forward onto the next slide, the reason that folks like to procure this way. And so this is kind of some benefits here. So the fact that these have been pre-competed, that this satisfies those requirements, not only saves time, but saves resources with personnel inside the organization, and also allows to be able to speed that procurement process, like we're talking about here with funding deadlines, or when is school out of session? When do you have Easter break or something like that, and you need to get something done? You have a compliant way that you can get these solutions on a very expedited timeline, but these are very complete, solutions. So it can also reduce the cost of acquisition, meaning pre-construction costs or other costs associated with going out and putting these solicitations out there on the street. Then when we respond with specific line items and a number of methods of delivery. So what I mean by that is, if you looked at all the pieces and parts maybe that are in a car, okay, if you had to go and order every nut and bolt and things going into purchasing that car, it would be very difficult for entities to do that. And also if they wanted to customize or they only needed specific things. So when we've responded with line items so that we can customize the solution to the size and the entity in a prescriptive way, as you said, so that, again, they're getting best value and exactly what they need when they need it. And because of these line items and the way we put together the proposals, this helps eliminate those after the fact change orders. So we can give a proposal that gives them that budget predictability so that they know what they will pay. And in various methods of delivery, we have several different ways they can do that. Again, we look at their procurement preferences or how they would like to, expedite the process and the projects, and we can help them with that. So in that way, it eliminates any contractor-driven or unforeseen change orders. Only things if they've truly changed their mind or they've truly added something to the scope of work later. And then really in the best value of those solutions, and also saving this time and the money in the process of how this has been done on their behalf by these cooperative contracting, entities and agencies, but also being able to work with local and best-in-class contractors. So this doesn't take the money out of the local economy or circumvent any of the taxpayer dollars, or in the case of higher education, alumni or certain funds or things that they may have with specific goals to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So being able to get small business or minority businesses included, we can help do that and help them meet those goals to provide that overall best value. And then moving forward, talking about these federal funds, so looking at the ways in which federal funds or grant funding can be utilized. There's specific requirements under this grant funding that the federal government may have additional terms and conditions or regulations that you have to meet, in addition to what might be state and local. So if we move forward to the next slide and talk a little bit more about the actual compliance of these contracts, these systems are usually where local entities either participate in another governmental or in another cooperative format, and they're registered, as we said, to be member agencies of that. So like a higher education, they are members of E&I and can compliantly use that contract, or K-12 or the others. And then in the state where we're talking about state and local contracting laws, then there's also additional terms and conditions in some of these contracts to meet state specifics. So they're widely used as a delivery method, not only for facilities restorations, but also for maintenance and repair. And as you mentioned, diagnostics, so we can adhere to the legal requirements and things that are specific to public bid when we're talking about public works projects. But the entity has greater control in that streamlined process and that budget predictability. So, thousands of entities from education to healthcare, government, non-for-profits use these cooperative contracts and like them. But again, many times they just thought that public works, or when you're looking at very complex solutions or maybe multiple solutions in one project, that they couldn't do it through these contracts. So we're here to make sure everyone knows that they very much can. And then if you'll move to the next slide, then, as I mentioned, the new EDGAR, or the compliance piece for the ESSER 2, ESSER 3, her funding, and even moving forward once these funds expire or if entities have already used them, there are other funds that may be out there that they can use for various solutions, as well as maybe when there's disasters and other things that happen and there's emergency situations. Many times, FEMA or other basically funding packages may come out in the future in which the federal government requires that you are compliant when they are using federal funds. So here again, one of these entities may have funds, they may want to use a cooperative contract, but if that cooperative contract does not meet those uniform guidelines, they can't use those federal funds for that solution. So what we're trying to do here today is make sure we connect all the dots to say funds are available. They're available for an array of solutions. These cooperative contracts help provide the best value when you're choosing how to take forward those projects. And then the funds that you may be using from federal or state funds or other things are compliant in a way that these contracts can also be utilized. So it kind of takes it all those steps and helps from not only what you're buying, but how you need to buy it or how you need to procure it, and making sure we've got those compliant pieces. So moving forward again, next slide there. Looking at all of those things that we have in place, then I'd like you to be able to talk about what then specifically makes this best value, or the solutions that we have and the way that they apply to these various HVAC and other indoor air quality components from your aspect. And then I'll come back later to talk about the roofing and kind of the building envelope piece of it, again, to tie things in together.
Sure. Well, thanks, Regina. That made perfect sense to me, why these cooperative purchasing contracts, member agencies do a lot of the legwork up front. So these school systems and not-for-profits and universities don't really have to, or they can focus on other areas, right, that they can use their procurement department for more efficiently. So yeah, when we start to look at using these funds for indoor air quality or HVAC, I think I'd like to just let everyone know, if you aren't familiar with Pure Air, or maybe have been a little confused as we have been acquired and merged into WTI, Weatherproofing Technologies Incorporated, under Trimco CPG. We've been around, these services have been around and have been in development since 1985. So we're not coming in inside of the gold rush of COVID. We're not coming in to take advantage of this funding. We've been doing this long before COVID. We've been focused on indoor air quality and keeping the spread of viruses and allergens and other microbes out of buildings and out of these HVAC systems. So we were rolled into WTI as a suite of specialized services in 2021, as I said, as now part of the Trimco Construction Products Group. And we have 3 specialized divisions, right? And so we kind of break this down into testing, cleaning, and restoring the indoor air quality within a building and the conditions and performance of the HVAC systems. And so as such, we have a building sciences division that is made up of industrial hygienists, test and balance techs, mechanical engineers that can go through the building or go through the HVAC systems, do those proper diagnostics on ISO certified equipment that's calibrated correctly, and to be able to generate reports, prescriptive reports that I'm going to talk about here in a second, to be able to give you a clear path using actionable data to start to knock down some of these deficiencies that they might find in your building or in your systems. Of course, we have a full service environmental laboratory that is CDC Elite and A2LA accredited to support this building sciences division. And so any kind of environmental samples that are taken from the building or the mechanical systems are sent to the laboratory to be cultured and studied, so we know exactly what we're dealing with from a particle standpoint or a microbial standpoint, mold, any kinds of bacteria, viruses even. And then, of course, once you have all of this prescriptive data, we have a division, our building remediation division, that can go out there and fill that prescription. That can go out there and take care of any issues that we find within the building or the air conveyance system. Of course, all of these divisions and the technicians that work within them, the microbiologists, like I said, the certified industrial hygienists, mechanical engineers, our HVAC service techs are all certified in their sphere of influence. Like they're certified and have the proper accreditations and are continually tested out and kept current to be able to perform this work at a very high level. And so since this time, we've worked in all kinds of higher education, K through 12 school districts, government, hospitals. We do a lot of hospital work and commercial buildings, almost 1 billion square feet since 1985 and nearly 20,000 buildings serviced. And of course, our focus has always been healthy buildings make for healthy people. And we know this, right? Because if we take a look at the HVAC system and why it's so closely tied to how the building performs with indoor air quality, it's because it's the lungs of a building. That's why during COVID, there was such a focus, besides the PPE, as we talked about earlier, social distancing, but there was a focus on the ventilation, the V part of HVAC, right, in these buildings. So HVAC is the lungs of a building. And what does that mean? Well, it actually is the mechanical system that takes a breath for the building. It removes all of the old stale air, and then it returns it to the system, mixes it with fresh outside air, filters it, and then returns the clean conditioned air back to the occupiable space. And so as a point of reference in your home, this typically happens 2 times an hour, right? You know, depending on how you want to set your thermostat. But in commercial buildings, in schools, it's probably about 4 times an hour. And in healthcare, it's 6 to 10 times an hour. 10 times being like an ICU or a surgical suite. Well, in COVID, all of these numbers jumped up to being like 12 times for an ICU, 6 times for a classroom, right, instead of 4. And so as we talked about in that report earlier, a lot of these HVAC systems couldn't handle better filtration. It couldn't handle the increased capacity to be able to make these air changes. And so that's why we've gotten into a little bit of trouble, as well as deferred maintenance, as you can see in this picture. Another interesting fact, right, is that we breathe 3,000 gallons of air a day, and we spend 90% of our time indoors. And this fact from the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, was reported way before COVID, right? So as you can imagine, I mean, COVID, we were locked down, we were in our own homes, except for first responders. But even if you think about that, right? You get up, you get in your car, that's an indoor environment. You go, or the train or the bus, and then you get off the bus, then you go into the school or the building, and then there's that short amount of time, unless you're really spending a lot of time outdoors or like on the weekends. So that's why this stuff is so important. It can't be overstated for the human and building health of these schools and these buildings, as well as the energy efficiency. Because when you start to see these systems degrade, you start to see that they end up using more energy to produce the same amount of ventilation or cooling or heating than they otherwise would. And so, for example, this picture came from one of our diagnostic reports before we came in and restored the unit, and this system was actually functioning this way. And so as you can see, the wall of the unit is coming down. There's fiberglass insulation on the floor. It's being picked up by this blower and moved through the coil, which is going to cause some airflow obstructions in the coil, but some of it might bypass the coil and actually get into the air that we breathe. So this is just one example. So when we talk about optimizing these systems for good indoor air quality, there's 4 main ways to get to healthy HVAC systems. And the first, of course, is to understand what you're dealing with and to be able to survey this equipment and to be able to take assessments. The second, then, based on that data, right, follow the science, it would be cleaning the units up, then restoring them by refinishing them, getting rid of corrosion, repainting them, retrofitting them with new equipment like this blue fan that you see here, and then, of course, cleaning the corresponding ductwork that these air handlers hook up to. And when you can bring these three things in alignment, as well as other building envelope things that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, that's where you start to produce good indoor air quality, a good baseline for operations. So when we get into the assessments, you know, we say test, don't guess, right? Like we have a lot of facility management people that we talk to that say, oh, well, I maintain my units, or I change my filters regularly, or I spray the coils off, I'm good. Or they might come to us and say, well, our units are getting to be 15 or 20 years old. We know we're just going to have to replace them. We're just eking them along. But it's very high level or tertiary data. It's like a feeling, right? They're not going through and investigating this stuff. And so what these kind of assessments do is it provides actionable data for your maintenance and operation plans, right? It's going to build out a complete mechanical inventory that's not relying on school district staff, but it's relying on a third party like WTI Pure Air Controls to actually come in, assess these units. You know, again, certified industrial hygienists, mechanical engineers, test and balance guys, right? That are going to come in, survey this equipment from an engineering, environmental, and physical condition perspective, right? And take all of that and put it into a report. And it's going to provide actionable data based on each air handler unit that's going to give you prioritization on whether you need to replace these units, clean them, restore them, right? And another side note is that ASHRAE, this organization that helped the U.S. Green Building Council with this report that we kicked off with, and that also made the recommendations for the CDC and the National Institutes of Health, right, to increase ventilation and to flush buildings and what to do to help improve this situation. Well, long ago, they wrote a standard called 62.1, which addresses ventilation and indoor air quality. And in it, there's a whole chapter on compliance for operations and maintenance. And it says that as a facility manager or a mechanical engineer or HVAC tech for your school, you should develop this manual. You should keep it on site. And the operation and maintenance of this equipment should be per this manual that you develop, right? And so the minimum maintenance activity and frequency for an HVAC system is mentioned in this chapter, and 27 areas deal with inspection and maintenance, and 13 of those, just about half, right, deal with cleanliness, right? And this breakdown for this guidance or this compliance actually says, well, you have to look at these components, you know, once a quarter, these components 2 times a year, these components once a year. You should clean it. Again, it sets the cadence for the various times of the year that you should be doing this stuff. And this type of HVAC assessment goes a long way. In fact, you could argue that it actually develops this manual for you, right? And so it's an investment, really, not only in your facility, but to give you that data to make 3- and 5-year capital plans or asset plans for managing this very expensive equipment that keeps the ventilation and the heating and cooling in your system or in your school building in shape. So when we look at using this data, basically what it's going to do, and we know that a campus, you know, even if it's one elementary school or one high school, or if it's a number of schools over a school district or a university, is going to have multiple air handler units, right? So you come in and you look at all of these air handler units, the engineering, the environmental, the physical conditions. Those scores are all aggregated for each air handler unit, and then a comprehensive survey is presented at the executive level that shows what shape these units are in. And so as you can see here, it's a very easy to understand report, good, restore, replace conditions, and it's going to just map out exactly what needs to happen. As we know, these pieces of equipment are you know, kind of expensive, right? They're big mechanical machines that hook up on the roof inside of a building. And so there's never funds to replace all of these at once. Just because an air handler is old doesn't mean it needs to be replaced. So a lot of asset management surveys that would look at this type of equipment, or even a roof for that matter, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, are going to just look and say, well, it's 20 years old, you better get ready to replace it. Well, if the school was built 20 years ago, all 32 units are 20 years old. You're never going to be able to replace those. You might be able to do 3 or 5 a year if you were just going to blanket replace them. And so these kinds of deep dive asset and assessments for HVAC are going to give you a really clear way to start to plan and to be able to manage this equipment. And so when we start to look at these first two sets, right, of cleaning and restoration, you know, we look at a very high level way to clean HVAC systems, and that is by using high temperature, low pressure steam. And it offers a thorough cleaning of the air handler unit, or AHU. And so basically what that means is that it's going to sanitize the coils, which is what transfers the heating or cooling off of the coil, and then the blower blows across it, and that temperature differential gets moved into the rooms that we're occupying, right? And what it's going to do is it's going to sanitize it at up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit at about 350 psi. It's eco-friendly. It's just water and bioenzymes, so there's no harsh or caustic chemicals that goes onto these metal components that can get in the middle of these coils and corrode them over time. It's not sending caustic chemicals down the drain and into the gray water or sewage system, right? And so what it's going to do is this 350 psi, 350 degree Fahrenheit steam is going to remove airflow obstructions from deep within the coils. And so when we look at these coils, and I'm just going to give a high level overview here, again, these are copper pipes that are spiraling through these coils, right? And there's these little thin fins that are just 3/16 of an inch apart. And what happens is this hot or cold water chills down all of these fins, a fan blows through it, and that air is transferred. Well, if you get fouling, like you see here, it's like throwing a blanket over that coil, right? Not only does that obstruct the airflow, which degrades ventilation downstream into the rooms, but it also insulates that coil, which means that the machine has to work longer to achieve the temperature you're trying to set for the rooms, which uses more energy. So by steam cleaning these coils out, steam cleaning these units, not only are you sanitizing them, you're not using harsh chemicals that's going to corrode these coils, but you're also going to clear obstructions that are deep within the coils to improve energy efficiency. So in fact, we see very quick payback using this system through energy savings. Some in as little as 1.25 years have paid back this actual service through energy savings alone. So a couple things to consider as we've talked about cooperative contracts and how we're spec'd into these contracts that were publicly solicited and then we won, is that steam cleaning equipment should be rated for the air handler unit that it's going to clean, so the size and the type of air handler unit, and it should be rated prior through the assessment and through the scope of the job that we're trying to conduct. And of course, then that service should also be able to be available outside of normal operation hours for your school, so overnight breaks, so that way there's no facility disruption when we're in here cleaning these coils. So, you know, a point to mention is we've developed a 14-point process to do this. We've been doing this since the mid-'80s, and then through COVID, and recently you've seen many firms, even someone like Stanley Steamer, a residential carpet cleaner, get into this type of service, which is a mechanical piece of machinery to be able to go into and work with a very high level of safety and things like that. So when we talk about trusted vendors, providing continuity, best in value, this is the kind of service that you're going to be wanting to look at and spec to be able to clean it. Then when we look at restoration and retrofitting of these units, we're looking at a process that is able to restore these units in place. So whether it's on a roof or whether it's in a tight mechanical room within the building, we're able to basically refurbish these units, bring them up to as good as new or maybe even better than new with retrofits where they sit. So if you were to replace a unit inside of a mechanical room, you would not be able to just cut a hole in the wall and take this big box out of the mechanical room. You would have to take it apart piece by piece, haul it out by hand, and then the brand new unit that comes on the back of a flatbed truck would have to be taken apart piece by piece and put together back inside of this mechanical room. So as you can see, by restoring in place, there's less disruption to the facility, it takes less time, and ultimately costs less money, right? 20 to 40% the cost of new replacement. So it creates a smaller carbon footprint. You're not trucking new equipment in, you're not doing temporary cooling, you're not bringing cranes in to remove the units off of the roof, right? And the cool thing about this is that regardless of these ESSER funds, as we talk about moving past them, this type of service, even though it's labor-based, even though it's a restorative service, you can pay with capital expenditure budgets, CapEx, because the equipment will be recommissioned and it will be re-warrantied. So you're going to have a best-in-class warranty with Trimco, and it's going to be recommissioned. And so that way you're able to access capital budgets and spare your maintenance or operational budgets to actually do this kind of work. Of course, it includes the HVAC steam cleaning and all of the benefits that I mentioned there. And then it's going to include the refinishing of these metal components inside of the air handler unit. So we're going to strip down, sandblast, remove all the corrosion, prime, and paint it with high performance coatings that are antimicrobial, corrosion resistant, and have a low odor application. Any fiberglass, like this moldy, degraded fiberglass that you see by this blower, is going to be environmentally removed and disposed of, and then new non-fiberglass insulation can be put in that is just able to be wiped down, and it's a one-to-one replacement. So it's the same R factor, same acoustic properties, if not better, same fire spread, if not better. And then finally, a popular upgrade that we do to these systems when we're restoring them is we put in new fan technology. And so what does that mean? Well, this is probably the only thing that's evolved in an air conditioning unit in the last 50 years is this fan technology, right? So before, you'd have to turn this big old paddle wheel, like on a paddle boat, a big steel paddle wheel with an axle and a big AC motor and belts. You'd have to keep it greased. These belts would shed rubber that would get into the coil, block airflow, right? They could burn up. And if this blower broke down, you would be out of service for that air handler unit until you could get the parts and get someone in there to fix it. With these fan walls or fan arrays, right, what happens is if one of these fans happens to come unplugged, or if it fails, the other fans that are in the wall ramp up, and service inside of that unit is never lost. Plus, you're able to hook it into building automation systems, and it provides tremendous energy savings over this belt-driven AC motor. So very cool stuff. Again, 20 to 40% the cost of actually replacing it with a new unit. And then finally, why would you want to clean these units or restore these units, or even units that we can't work on or that we can't, help out, and you have to replace? Why would you want to hook a new unit up to dirty ducts, right? So if the system was already underperforming, you were operating under deferred maintenance, you've never cleaned your ducts in the last 5-10 years, you wouldn't want to clean all of this equipment up and hook it up to dirty ducts. We know that ducts can contain particles, they can spread particles. Like I was saying, if there was infiltration around the filter, around the coil, fiberglass could get in there. You saw that last picture, there's mold growing inside of an air handler unit. Bacteria and where the water's collecting in the drain pans can all get to where we breathe, and they can all build up in these duct systems too. So duct cleaning is going to remove all of that. It's going to reduce allergy and asthma reactions. We know asthma can become a big problem in schools as far as school absence goes, or disruption in classrooms. And so that's going to improve that situation. And of course, it's going to improve airflow because there's actually equipment inside of this ductwork. And so not all duct cleaning companies or services are the same. So when we talk about that, specifications, again, like the kind of specifications that were written into these cooperative contracts, they matter, right? Because there's basically two main considerations aside from whether or not the company or their technicians are certified. And that's one, Are they an environmentally focused company, or are they just sort of the low bid, commoditized type of duct cleaning that's going to go through and just, back out all of the ducts and just kind of run and gun, in other words, 25 feet at a time, go, 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 not address this inline equipment, right? Maybe they don't have the proper tools. Maybe they're not putting up what's called containment, which is making sure that there's no cross contamination into other areas of the building. And then do they provide a full report with photo documentation, with what was actually done, before and after photos? And then again, can the company actually clean the HVAC equipment that's within the duct system? So as you see here, this is a coil that boosts the heating or cooling maybe 100 feet down the line. And we've seen duct cleaning companies where we might have lost a publicly solicited bid come through, and we've had to come behind them and actually clean this equipment and clean up these ducts again. Excuse me. So that's so important, and whether or not they're certified as well. So Regina, as we have covered sort of the importance of HVAC to IAQ, why don't you take us through some more building envelope solutions that Trimco and WTI does as a whole?
Right. Well, and as you mentioned in what you were talking about, looking at these separate components that all make up a system. So whether it be the HVAC system or the exterior of what we call the building envelope. So the walls, the exterior masonry, the windows, the doors, and also the roof and rooftop units. So all of these systems work collectively and work together. Like you mentioned, if you restore an area, but then you negate or don't do, or how do you know what you don't know? So a lot of times, I think in many organizations, they're just unaware of, and they think they need one thing, like you said, duct cleaning, or we need a new HVAC, or we need a new roof because it's leaking or it's out of warranty, as you mentioned. So the fact that all of these building envelope components can be restored, and we have solutions for those, and we know we have the expertise, we have the science, we have the qualifications to be able to look at all these systems, not in just a one-off way, or how do we just respond to this one small part that you need to have done, but collectively we look at that entire building envelope. And again, that these funds and that these cooperative contracts are available for us to be able to help come in and educate the organizations and show them why this is best value, or show them how this is a better way to handle things. And many times in that best value, it's that this is also less costly than separating all these components out. So we just want everyone to think of the entire building envelope, and we say we manage all 6 sides of the building, and collectively through all of our offerings and solutions, we can do that. And as you mentioned, restoring things like roofs or like HVAC, being able to give a full system warranty, being able to back that up, not just here we're going to do something that's going to help it perform better, but we're also going to back up the work that we do and take financial responsibility for what we said would work. So that's that extra layer. That's that vetting. That's that peace of mind that we can help with that building envelope. And keep in mind too that water or moisture infiltration through leaks on roofs, or gaps, cracks, and holes, as we like to say, where windows or sealants or doors, that lets moisture, and in the CDC guidelines and in a lot of this funding, and also moving forward to say, as you mentioned very early on, if we're spending 90% of our time in these buildings, or these are our lungs, if this water and moisture is getting in through various areas, you might be doing all you can or all you have in one area, but you don't realize what's creating the problem is getting in through other ways in other areas. So again, just keeping in mind that this system as a whole, the entire building envelope, impacts indoor air quality and our health and safety of these locations. And then I'll have you move forward to the next slide here, just to highlight once again that looking at the testing and maintenance and diagnostics of these units, as well as, like I mentioned, the walls, the windows, the rooftops, is included in this type of funding and maintenance. And then there's various prescriptive ways depending on what you need. Again, you can't be the expert on anything, not everything. That's why you need experts to come come in and say, here's the report and here's the data and here's why solution good, better, best. Here's some options as well. So any of these things that are there, whether it be the ESSER 2 or 3 or the HERF funding, to optimize the health and safety of the environment in which we're learning and working and residing, quite frankly, in most sense, we spend the majority of our time there. So helping those educational agencies and entities and the like. So moving forward, just one more slide. We want to point out that, you know, when you get this or you get a copy of it, if you weren't able, you're not on today, but you're joining, you can go. There's other resources and guidelines out there that you can access and look at, as well as there's the handout that's available. But these federal funds, we're finding a lot of them have not been allocated and spent. So we want to help the organizations know what they can do, know what's compliant, know what is available for them, so they don't miss out on things where they already may not have had monies for capital expenditures or maintenance and operations. These funds can be used on these systems and will save them money, you know, going down the road too. And then also, all of these things are available, and not just going to our website, but also a microsite that we have called yourroofexperts.com. And there you can fill out, you can give some basic information, and we will get back to you. So we will get back to you, talk with you, and find out which one of our solution specialists from which one of our divisions needs to be involved in what you're looking at, and get you the help that you need locally. And then you can also access a lot of these handouts or this guidance. So everything there, although that's not, you know, our Tremco Inc. or WTI Services email, you can email us. But going to that microsite will also help just expedite if you're like, where do I go from here? Or how do I get someone else involved in what we're doing so far, to see that we're on track, or to see that we don't miss out on these funds or these opportunities that are there. And then moving forward, that you have a good plan, that someone helps you establish that, and in a way that you're still in control and have this budget predictability and peace of mind, knowing the building envelope and the entire system is handled. So I just thank everybody for joining us today. And Troy, if you have some closing thoughts there. Otherwise, I just want to make sure everyone knew where to get these resources and be able to contact us so that we can help them moving forward.
No, absolutely. Your Roof Experts is a really great site, and it's going to connect you with exactly what you need. Again, Regina, I just thank you. You brought
Absolutely.
a lot of expertise and knowledge, especially on the public procurement side, the compliance side, some things that I didn't even know I learned about today. And so that's always a win-win. And again, we just thank everyone for coming today. We're sort of right up against the hour, but again, thank you for sticking around, and be sure to check both Tremco and WTI channels, social medias, to find out when the next informative online workshop is. So on behalf of Regina and myself, I just want to say thanks, and we'll see you next time.